The Galactic Empire, accustomed to effortless victories, had expanded its dominion across the stars for millennia. Their conquests were swift and absolute, consuming entire star systems with barely a whisper of resistance. This wasn't solely due to the sheer scale of their armada or the terrifying technology they commanded. The true key to the Empire's seemingly unbreakable power resided in a single individual, Tarlok. More than a mere soldier, Tarlok was the living embodiment of martial prowess, a legend whispered across the galaxy. His mere presence on a battlefield had shattered the resolve of entire civilizations. He moved with the speed and ferocity of a tempest, his strikes too quick to be perceived, his strategies impeccable. Some whispered that he had participated in so many conflicts that he had become more machine than man. Unlike warriors who relied on advanced weaponry, Tarlok needed no such tools. His body itself was a weapon, and he had never experienced the sting of defeat. The Empire, understandably, took immense pride in their champion. He had single-handedly secured more than half of their territory. Entire military campaigns were planned with the underlying assumption that, should all else fail, Tarlok would arrive and victory would inevitably follow. He had been tested against the galaxy's most formidable beings, colossal brutes from gas giants, cunning strategists from distant nebulae, even ruthless AI constructs. None had posed a significant challenge. Now, however, the Empire faced a peculiar new adversary. Reports from the Fringe system spoke of a newly discovered race hailing from a planet designated as Deathworld, a world so hostile that the mere existence of life seemed an affront to its environment. Deathworlders were not an entirely new concept to the Empire, they had encountered creatures from harsh environments before. While these beings often prove resilient, they were typically little more than animals, their instincts sharpened by brutal conditions. These humans, however, from a world they called Earth, were different. Their planet ranked higher on the Death World scale than any the Empire had previously encountered. Volcanoes, earthquakes, predators lurking everywhere, and yet, these humans had not only survived, they had thrived, building complex civilizations amidst the chaos. It was puzzling, to say the least. The Imperial Council, in their arrogance, dismissed the humans as just another species to be subjugated, another insignificant footnote in their long history of conquest. They couldn't fathom how a group of primitive Deathworlders could possibly threaten the Empire's might. As was customary, Tarlok was dispatched to handle the situation personally. The Empire didn't merely want to defeat the humans, they wanted to make an example of them, a clear demonstration to the galaxy that even the harshest environments could produce nothing capable of challenging their supremacy. Tarlok was more than willing to oblige. What better way to reaffirm his legendary status than by crushing these backward creatures from a planet seemingly more prone to natural disasters than sentient life? As the fleet approached human territory, Tarlok anticipated yet another effortless victory. In his mind, it was a simple equation: new species, new victory, another trophy for his already impressive collection. The humans would fall, just like all the others before them. Little did he suspect that this encounter would be unlike any other, a battle that would defy all expectations, even his own. The Empire's fleet materialized in Earth's orbit with the expected grandeur and arrogance of a galactic superpower. Massive dreadnoughts, gleaming in the light of a nearby star, hung over the planet like ominous portents. The sheer size of the ships was intended to instill fear in any species foolish enough to resist. Earth, however, appeared unconcerned. The humans had apparently detected the approaching fleet days in advance, yet there were no visible planetary defenses, no ostentatious displays of military might, not even a formal diplomatic response. Instead, the humans transmitted a message that could only be described as perplexing. It was a casual broadcast from what the Empire assumed was some kind of governing body, though it lacked the expected formality. The human spokesperson, a woman in a stained shirt casually sipping from a mug, seemed utterly unfazed by the looming invasion force. "Yeah, we see you up there," she'd said with a nonchalant air. "Give us a sec, all right? We're kind of in the middle of something. You guys don't have like a form or something we can fill out?" The Empire was baffled. Their protocols anticipated fear, negotiation, perhaps even defiance, but it was as if the humans didn't take them seriously. For the first time in a long time, the Imperial Council felt a flicker of uncertainty. Tarlok, of course, remained unperturbed. In his view, this was merely another display of Deathworlder foolishness. He was certain their insolence would quickly transform into desperation once they witnessed his power. They always did. To emphasize their dominance, the Empire decided to bring one of the humans back to their homeworld, a living exhibit to showcase the Empire's superiority in the grand arena. That's where Jenkins came in. Jenkins, by all accounts, was an entirely ordinary human. He had been randomly selected by a scouting drone while enjoying a sandwich in a park. No combat experience, no special abilities, no leadership roles, he wasn't even part of the military. The humans had explained it as a wrong place, wrong time situation. And now, here he was, dragged across the stars and deposited in the center of the Empire's grandest Colosseum, staring blankly at the thousands of alien faces jeering down at him. He wasn't afraid, just bewildered. If anything, Jenkins seemed more annoyed by the whole ordeal than anything else. His hands were still sticky from the remnants of his sandwich, and he kept wiping them on his pants, muttering about how this wasn't his problem. The crowd roared with anticipation. They had witnessed countless battles here, but nothing like this. A Deathworlder, the first to ever grace the arena. This was a special occasion, not because they expected a challenge, but because they anticipated a spectacle. No one expected a fight, they expected a slaughter. At the center of the arena stood Tarlok, his armor gleaming under the artificial sun, his eyes fixed on Jenkins like a predator assessing its next meal. He didn't see a worthy opponent, he saw an opportunity to further solidify his legend. Jenkins, however, found the whole situation increasingly bizarre. One minute he was enjoying his lunch, the next he was being hauled across space to fight in some sort of gladiatorial arena against an alien warrior who looked like he'd stepped straight out of a low-budget sci-fi film. He stared at Tarlok, bewildered, rubbing the back of his neck. What the hell is this? Some kind of show? Tarlok, of course, didn't reply. He never spoke to those he fought. There was no point in communicating with the soon-to-be-defeated. Instead, he took a single step forward, his gaze unwavering. The crowd fell silent, anticipating the swift, merciless end they expected. The Empire, naturally, reveled in Tarlok's triumphs. He alone had conquered over half of their vast territories. Military strategies were devised with the unspoken understanding that, should everything else crumble, Tarlok's arrival would ensure victory. He had proven himself against the galaxy's most formidable foes, gigantic beasts from gaseous planets, brilliant strategists from distant nebulae, and even cold, calculating AI. None had presented a true obstacle. Yet, the Empire now encountered a strange new opponent. Reports from the outer reaches of their domain described a recently encountered species originating from a planet classified as a death world, a world so hostile that life itself seemed improbable. Death worlds were not unfamiliar to the Empire, they had encountered organisms from harsh environments before. These life forms, while often resilient, were generally no more than savage beasts, their survival instincts honed by the brutal realities of their home worlds. However, these humans, from a planet they called Earth, were an anomaly. Their planet scored higher on the death world scale than any other the Empire had documented. Volcanoes, earthquakes, predators at every turn, and yet, these humans had not merely survived, they had flourished, creating complex societies amidst the constant turmoil. It was, to put it mildly, baffling. The Imperial Council, blinded by their hubris, dismissed the humans as simply another race to conquer, a minor detail in their expansive history of dominion. They couldn't grasp how a group of primitive Deathworlders could pose any threat to the Empire's vast power. Following established protocol, Tarlok was sent to personally address the matter. The Empire's objective was not just to vanquish the humans, but to use them as a cautionary tale, a stark reminder to the galaxy that even the most inhospitable environments could produce nothing that could challenge their reign. Tarlok was eager to comply. What better way to reinforce his legendary status than by crushing these unsophisticated beings from a planet seemingly more prone to natural calamities than intelligent life? As the fleet neared human space, Tarlok expected another swift victory. He envisioned a straightforward outcome, new species encountered, new victory achieved, another addition to his vast collection of triumphs. He assumed the humans would yield, just like countless others before them. He was entirely unprepared for the events that would unfold, a battle unlike any other, a conflict that would defy all expectations, including his own. The Empire's fleet materialized in Earth's orbit with all the pomp and circumstance expected of a galactic superpower. Enormous warships, gleaming in the light of a nearby star, hung menacingly above the planet like harbingers of doom. The sheer scale of the vessels was meant to instill fear in any species foolish enough to resist. Yet, Earth appeared unmoved. The humans had apparently detected the incoming fleet days earlier, yet there were no visible planetary defenses, no grand displays of military strength, not even an official diplomatic communication. Instead, the humans sent out a message that was utterly bewildering. It was an informal broadcast from what the Empire presumed to be some form of governing body, though it lacked the expected decorum. The human speaker, a woman in a stained top casually taking a drink from a mug, seemed entirely unfazed by the imminent invasion force. "Yeah, we see you up there," she'd remarked casually. "Hold on a minute, okay? We're kinda busy right now. Don't you guys have some sort of form we're supposed to fill out or something?" The Empire was completely perplexed. They expected terror, negotiations, perhaps even outright resistance, but this was as if the humans hadn't even registered their presence as a threat. For the first time in centuries, the Imperial Council experienced a flicker of doubt. Tarlok, naturally, remained unconcerned. He perceived this as just another instance of Deathworlder ignorance. He was certain their bravado would crumble into despair once they witnessed his power. It always did. As a display of their dominance, the Empire resolved to bring one of the humans back to their home world, a living specimen to showcase their supremacy in the grand arena. And that's where Jenkins entered the picture. Jenkins, in every conceivable way, was an average human. He was chosen at random by a scouting drone while having a sandwich in a park. No combat training, no unique skills, no position of authority, he wasn't even a member of their military. The humans explained it as being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Now, he found himself transported across the stars and placed in the center of the Empire's most impressive Colosseum, staring blankly at the thousands of alien faces leering down at him. He wasn't terrified, merely confused. More than anything, Jenkins seemed irritated by the entire affair. His hands were still sticky from his lunch, and he repeatedly wiped them on his pants, grumbling about how none of this was his fault. The crowd roared with excitement. They had witnessed countless battles here, but nothing like this. A Deathworlder, the first ever in the arena. This was a momentous occasion, not because they anticipated a challenge, but because they expected a spectacle. No one force or a fight, they anticipated a massacre. Following established procedure, Tarlok was dispatched to personally resolve the situation. The Empire didn't simply wish to conquer the humans, they aimed to make a spectacle of them, a blatant warning to the galaxy that even the most unforgiving planets could not produce a species capable of opposing their absolute rule. Tarlok, naturally, was more than happy to comply. How better to bolster his legendary reputation than by vanquishing these primitive beings from a world seemingly more suited to natural catastrophes than sentient life? As the fleet drew near to human-controlled space, Tarlok anticipated yet another swift and decisive triumph. The scenario was simple in his mind: a new species encountered, a new victory secured, another accolade to add to his already extensive list of accomplishments. The humans, he assumed, would surrender just as all others had before them. He was utterly unprepared for the extraordinary events that were about to unfold, a confrontation unlike any he had experienced, a battle that would defy all predictions, including his own. The Imperial fleet arrived in Earth's orbit with the typical ostentatious display one would expect from a galactic superpower. Colossal battleships, their surfaces gleaming in the light of a nearby sun, hung ominously over the planet, a stark display of impending power. The very size of the warships was designed to instill terror in any species audacious enough to contemplate resistance. Earth, however, seemed entirely unconcerned. The humans, it appeared, had detected the approaching fleet several days prior, yet there were no discernible planetary defense systems, no impressive demonstrations of military prowess, not even a proper diplomatic communique. Rather, the humans transmitted a communication that was nothing short of perplexing. It was a remarkably informal transmission from what the Empire presumed to be a governing entity, though it completely lacked the anticipated formality. The human representative, a woman in a somewhat disheveled blouse casually drinking from a cup, seemed entirely unperturbed by the imposing invasion force. "Yeah, hi, we see you up there," she had stated nonchalantly. "Give us a minute, would you? We're a bit preoccupied at the moment. Don't you guys have some paperwork or something we should fill out?" The Empire was utterly bewildered. Their standard protocols anticipated terror, negotiation, or perhaps even open defiance, but this was as though the humans hadn't even registered them as a threat. For what felt like the first time in an age, a flicker of doubt ran through the Imperial Council. Tarlok, of course, remained completely unfazed. He interpreted this as yet another display of Deathworlder naivete. He was certain their apparent indifference would quickly turn to desperation once they experienced the full extent of his power. It always did. To fully demonstrate their dominance, the Empire resolved to transport one of the humans back to their homeworld, a living example of their power, to be displayed in the grand arena. That is how Jenkins became involved. The Empire was bewildered. Their established procedures dictated responses of fear, negotiation, or even outright defiance, but this casual indifference was unprecedented. It was as though the humans didn't register the Empire as a threat at all. A flicker of uncertainty, a rare and unsettling feeling, stirred within the Imperial Council for the first time in generations. Tarlok, naturally, remained unfazed. He saw this unusual response as just another example of Deathworlder ignorance, a foolish bravado that he expected would quickly crumble into terror once they witnessed his prowess. That's how it always happened. To further underscore their dominance and make an example of these newly discovered humans, the Empire decided to bring one back to their homeworld, a living specimen to showcase their superiority in the grand arena. That's where Jenkins entered the narrative. Jenkins was, to put it simply, an average human in every respect. He'd been randomly selected by a scouting drone while having a sandwich in a public park. He possessed no combat training, no remarkable abilities, no leadership qualities, he wasn't even a member of any military organization. The humans, when questioned, explained it as a simple case of wrong place, wrong time. Now, inexplicably, Jenkins found himself transported across the vastness of space to the center of the Empire's most impressive Colosseum. He stared blankly at the thousands of alien faces peering down from the stands, not with fear, but with bewilderment. If anything, Jenkins seemed more irritated by the inconvenience than intimidated. His hands, still sticky from his interrupted lunch, were repeatedly wiped on his pants as he muttered complaints about how this whole situation wasn't his problem. The crowd roared with a mixture of excitement and anticipation. They had witnessed countless battles in this arena, but never anything quite like this. A Deathworlder, the very first to grace the arena floor, was a spectacle in itself. This wasn't about sport or a fair fight, it was pure entertainment, a demonstration of the Empire's unquestionable power. Nobody expected a contest, they anticipated a swift and brutal execution. In the center of the arena, Tarlok stood poised, his armor gleaming beneath the artificial sun, his eyes fixed on Jenkins like a predator assessing its prey. He didn't see a worthy opponent, but another opportunity to bolster his legendary status. For Jenkins, the whole affair continued to escalate in its absurdity. One moment he was enjoying a peaceful lunch in the park, the next he was being dragged across the galaxy to participate in some sort of intergalactic gladiatorial combat against an alien warrior who looked like he'd walked off the set of a cheesy sci-fi movie. He stared at Tarlok with a puzzled expression, rubbing the back of his neck. What in the world is this? Some kind of cosmic reality show, he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Tarlok, predictably, didn't deign to respond. He never spoke to his opponents. There was no point in communicating with those he was about to defeat. Instead, he took a measured step forward, his gaze never wavering from Jenkins. The crowd fell silent, anticipating the swift, brutal end they had come to expect. The crowd leaned forward, their anticipation reaching a fever pitch. Tarlok, the Empire's most celebrated warrior, stood motionless, his gaze fixed on Jenkins, the ordinary human caught in the middle of a bizarre intergalactic misunderstanding. A profound silence filled the arena as everyone waited for the inevitable, the moment when Tarlok would effortlessly crush this seemingly insignificant Deathworlder, cementing his status as the galaxy's most unstoppable force. Jenkins, for his part, appeared remarkably unconcerned. He was facing an 8-foot-tall alien killing machine, but that didn't seem to faze him. None of this made any sense, and honestly, he'd seen stranger things on the internet back home. His main concern was the sticky residue from his unfinished lunch. Tarlok finally initiated the combat, advancing with slow, deliberate steps toward Jenkins. His imposing figure seemed to cast a shadow over the entire arena, his formidable armor gleaming under the artificial illumination. Each step resonated, sending vibrations through the ground, intensifying the tension. The crowd held its collective breath. Jenkins sighed. "All right, big guy, let's just get this over with." He raised his fists awkwardly, clearly lacking any combat experience. His stance was clumsy, like someone who had passively observed too many boxing matches without ever participating. To the spectators, he appeared comical. Tarlok, a veteran of countless battles against the galaxy's most formidable warriors, hardened monsters, seasoned killers, and brilliant military strategists, couldn't help but sneer at this human who looked like he'd never been in a fight. He was ready to end this charade swiftly. With lightning speed, Tarlok lunged, his massive fist hurtling towards Jenkins. The crowd braced for the impact, expecting the human to be reduced to nothing. Then, the unexpected happened. Jenkins, in a reflexive, almost lackadaisical attempt to defend himself, threw a punch. It was clumsy, off balance, and aimed directly at Tarlok's chest. It connected, and for a brief moment, nothing happened. The crowd stared, bewildered. Jenkins blinked, unsure if he had actually struck the alien or merely swung at the air. His hand stung slightly, no more than if he had bumped into a door frame. Then came a soft thud, followed by an unmistakable stagger. Tarlok, the invincible warrior, the unbeatable legend of the Galactic Empire, took a step back, his expression, hidden behind his helmet, one of pure astonishment. Jenkins, still processing what had just occurred, tilted his head. Did I?" The crowd was utterly silent. They couldn't comprehend what they had witnessed. Tarlok had never been so much as touched in combat, let alone staggered by something as simple as a punch. Yet, there it was, plain as day, Tarlok, the Empire's greatest warrior, was off balance, reeling from a single strike by a Deathworlder who appeared to have no idea what he was doing. Tarlok attempted to recover, growling, his body tensing as he prepared to deliver a devastating blow. This time, he would obliterate this insolent human. He charged again, unleashing all his force and speed, a blur of motion too quick for most to perceive. Yet again, Jenkins threw a punch. This time, it wasn't just a stagger. Jenkins' fist connected with Tarlok's helmet, and the great warrior went down. It wasn't a graceful fall. He crashed to the ground with a clang, a plume of dust rising around him. Jenkins stood over him, blinking in disbelief. Did I win?" he stammered. The entire arena remained in stunned silence. Nobody spoke, nobody could speak. Tarlok, the pride of the Empire, lay on the ground, utterly unconscious, defeated by what appeared to be a clumsy human punch. The sheer absurdity of the situation was so overwhelming that many spectators wondered if they were hallucinating. Jenkins scratched his head, bewildered. Is that it? I mean, I didn't even hit him that hard." The silence was finally broken by a single, disbelieving laugh from somewhere high in the stands. Then another joined in, and another, until the entire arena erupted in a cacophony of laughter, a mixture of disbelief and amusement. Tarlok, the galaxy's greatest warrior, had been felled by a Deathworlder with all the grace of a clumsy relative at a family gathering. Jenkins, still standing awkwardly over Tarlok's unconscious form, looked around, unsure how to react. He had just survived what was supposed to be a fatal duel, but he couldn't quite grasp what had transpired. He wasn't a warrior, not a hero, just some average guy caught in a situation far beyond his comprehension. For the Empire, however, this was no laughing matter. Their greatest symbol of strength and invincibility had been brought down not by superior strategy or firepower, but by the most unremarkable punch imaginable. The laughter echoed through the arena, reverberating through the corridors of power within the Empire. For a civilization that prided itself on strength, strategy, and absolute dominance, this was a profound humiliation. The stunned silence that gripped the arena slowly gave way to a low murmur, then a ripple of laughter, and finally, an eruption of uproarious amusement. Tarlok, the Empire's legendary warrior, lay defeated, not by a cunning strategy or advanced weaponry, but by a seemingly effortless punch from an ordinary human. The irony was almost too much to bear. Jenkins, still slightly sticky from his lunch, looked around in bewilderment, trying to comprehend what had just happened. He hadn't expected to win, hadn't even really tried to win. It had all been so surreal, like a bizarre dream. He'd thrown a punch, purely on instinct, and the galaxy's greatest warrior had crumpled like a poorly constructed toy. The implications of Tarlok's defeat resonated far beyond the arena. Within the Empire's highest echelons of power, panic set in. This wasn't just a loss, it was a catastrophic blow to their image of invincibility. The whispers began almost immediately, spreading like wildfire through the assembled dignitaries and military commanders. If Tarlok, their ultimate champion, could be felled so easily, what did that say about the Empire's strength? What about their absolute dominance? The carefully crafted illusion of their unyielding power had been shattered by a simple, almost comical punch. For Jenkins, however, the whole situation remained utterly confusing. He had won, apparently, but he didn't feel like a victor. He felt more like a confused bystander who had accidentally stumbled into the spotlight. He scratched his head, looking around at the roaring crowd. So, is that it? Do I get, like, a prize or something? He mumbled, more to himself than anyone else. He wasn't interested in glory or accolades, he just wanted to go home, wash his sticky hands, and maybe finish that sandwich. The officials in the Emperor's private box were in disarray. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. Tarlok was supposed to effortlessly dispatch the human, reinforcing the Empire's supremacy. Instead, they were faced with a public relations nightmare of epic proportions. Vaxa, the Emperor's advisor, slammed his fist on the table, silencing the frantic chatter. This is unacceptable. We cannot allow this incident to become public knowledge. It will undermine our authority, embolden our enemies, and incite rebellion throughout the galaxy. He glared at the other officials. This must be contained. The witnesses silenced. The records destroyed. Down in the arena, two medics cautiously approached Tarlok's unconscious form. They avoided looking at Jenkins, who was now stretching his arms and legs as if he'd just finished a light jog. Tarlok slowly began to regain consciousness, his head throbbing, his pride wounded more deeply than he had ever thought possible. He pushed the medics away, rising unsteadily to his feet. His gaze locked onto Jenkins, not with anger, but with profound bewilderment. How had this happened? He had faced opponents far stronger, far more skilled, and had crushed them all. Yet, here he was, defeated by a human who seemed more preoccupied with his lunch than the fight. Jenkins, oblivious to the political and military turmoil he had inadvertently unleashed, gave Tarlok a casual nod. Hey, no hard feelings, right? I mean, I didn't even mean to hit you that hard, he said, extending a hand in a gesture of goodwill. Tarlok stared at the offered hand, completely dumbfounded. From the Emperor's box, Vaxa watched the scene unfold, his frustration mounting. He turned to the other council members. This cannot stand. If word of this gets out, every system under our control will question our authority. The rebellion movements will gain momentum. We will lose control of the outer colonies. He paused, his voice hardening. This human must be dealt with. But how could they deal with Jenkins? It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the message his victory had sent. The Empire had built its entire identity on the notion of invincibility, and that image had been shattered by the most unlikely of opponents. No amount of propaganda could erase the fact that Tarlok, their greatest warrior, had been felled by a man who seemed more concerned with sandwiches than strategy. Jenkins, increasingly bored with the whole affair, yawned and stretched again. So, are we done here? I've got things to do back on Earth, you know. Laundry and stuff. He started to walk away from the center of the arena, hands in his pockets, as if he were leaving a particularly dull meeting. He couldn't have known that at that very moment, the story of his victory was spreading through the galaxy like wildfire. Aliens across countless systems were hearing about the human who had knocked out the Empire's greatest warrior with a single, unimpressive punch. They couldn't believe it, but the footage didn't lie. And the more they heard it, the more they laughed. As Jenkins made his exit from the arena, oblivious to the political maelstrom he had unwittingly unleashed, he paused at the doorway, frowning slightly as he tried to recall the quickest route to the hangar bay. Man, I hope they have some kind of interstellar Uber here, he muttered, his mind already drifting back to the mundane comforts of home. He had no inkling that, in that very moment, the tale of his improbable victory was radiating outward across the galaxy, spreading like ripples on a cosmic pond. On countless planets, alien ears were tuning into the astonishing news of a human, a Deathworlder, who had laid low the Empire's most formidable warrior with a single, unassuming punch. Disbelief warred with amusement, but the undeniable video evidence silenced the skeptics. And the more the story spread, the more infectious the laughter became. Some, of course, saw the danger in this. Rebellious factions, suppressed for generations under the Empire's iron fist, saw in Jenkins a symbol, a beacon of hope. His punch transcended mere physical force, it represented the vulnerability of even the mightiest, the potential for even the seemingly weakest to rise up. This idea, once planted, took root and flourished, spreading like wildfire through the oppressed populations of the Empire's vast domain. Whispers of dissent, once hushed and fearful, began to grow louder, fueled by the sheer absurdity of Tarlok's downfall. In the opulent chambers of the Emperor, the atmosphere was thick with panic. The carefully constructed facade of invincibility had crumbled, and the officials scrambled to contain the damage. Vaxer, the Emperor's advisor, reiterated his desperate plea. We must suppress this. The galaxy cannot know the truth of this humiliating incident. Silence the witnesses, expunge the records. We cannot allow this single, insignificant human to unravel centuries of imperial dominance. But the attempt at damage control was already failing. Jenkins' victory, captured and broadcast across the galaxy, had become too widespread, too entertaining to ignore. It was the kind of story that transcended cultural barriers, uniting disparate species in shared amusement at the Empire's expense. The galaxy had a new folk hero, a reluctant champion who had achieved legendary status not through grand pronouncements or displays of power, but with a simple, almost underwhelming punch. Meanwhile, Jenkins, finally locating transportation back to Earth, settled into a nondescript cargo shuttle. He leaned back, hands clasped behind his head, still bemused by the entire affair. He had never aspired to be a warrior, a hero, or a symbol of resistance. He just wanted to finish his sandwich. As the shuttle's engines hummed to life and the vessel began its journey back towards Earth, he yawned and gazed out the window at the distant stars. Hope there's still some mustard left in the fridge, he murmured, utterly unaware of the galactic upheaval he had triggered. And so it was. No grand speeches, no declarations of war, just a man returning home after an unexpectedly eventful lunch break. He had stumbled into galactic history with the same casual indifference he might display while swatting a fly. But for the Empire, for the galaxy as a whole, that single, unassuming punch marked the beginning of a shift in power, a ripple effect they could no longer control. Something far more potent than any fleet or army had been unleashed, the realization that even the most formidable power can be toppled by the most unlikely of challengers. And when that realization takes hold, it spreads like wildfire, consuming everything in its path.